Welcome to the IDP Hunter podcast. I'm your host, IDP Hunter. As you guys know, I am a writer over at the RPO Network. I'm a writer and analyst over at the Fantasy Six Pack. I'm a top 10 IDP ranker in Fantasy Pros. But enough about me. I have a special guest tonight, and I'm going to tell you this is very impressive. Tonight's guest isn't just a fantasy football GM. He's the final boss of those fantasy football platforms. He didn't just win a better league. He went out there and built one. Some call him a visionary. I call him a master strategist. But in your dynasty league, he's already simulated it in his mind. May I present to you Evan Goldberg, the creator of Ultra GM. How you doing, Evan?
I'm doing great, Steve. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, I am so excited to hear what you have to say tonight. I don't know about you. I've been playing fantasy football for over 20 years. And I don't really get that excited. It takes a lot to wow me. But the little special that information that you have to share with our audience, I'm pretty sure it's going to wow them as well.
Great. Well, let me just give you the little bit of the spiel on Ultra GM. We've spoken about it before, but for the benefit of everybody else, Ultra GM is a new kind of fantasy football, totally different from anything else. And the idea is that we put you in the role of the GM of your chosen team. For most of us, that's going to be the favorite team, that team that we've loved our whole life, but you can choose whatever team you want. And you essentially go in, you acquire a team, you get that team's roster as of the start of the league year, which is the start of free agency. And then you build that team with a full 53-man roster plus a practice squad through a college draft, which is essentially a redo of the college draft, through free agency, through trades, through practice squad maneuvers. And then you compete fantasy football style with a full 53-man roster, scoring for all positions, and essentially compete to see who can be the best GM. This is the most realistic GM experience out there because it has all of the components that a real GM faces as they build the team. And for most of us, we've said countless times to ourselves and probably to others that we could do that job better than the guy who is actually running our favorite team. And this is the chance to prove it. So all of this happens subject to the real NFL salary cap, real NFL contracts. And it's as if your team, fired the GM back in February. They hired you to take over, and you're picking up the pieces and building that team in your own image, the way you think it should be built, with the draft picks you think the team should have made, with the free agents you think they should have signed.
Evan, you mentioned the salary cap, and you mentioned a couple interesting things like I'm taking over as a GM.
Sure.
But just a little bit of a follow-up question, some of the features you have on the site as well. What makes Ultra GM stand out, from other dynasty fantasy platforms? What makes yours unique?
So, the dynasty platform and the concept is building a team over time. And we're dynasty in that sense, in that this is a multi-year project. You should build your team the right way, do it through the draft, do it through young players, all of those kinds of considerations. But unlike your typical dynasty, you don't have to choose specific players that you are going to keep from year to year, or there's no limit on that. You keep your roster as long as the players on it are under contract. And if there are guys under contract that you don't want anymore, you can release them or trade them out. You can acquire new players. You're going to have the opportunity with the draft. So, fundamentally, what's most different probably from most other platforms is just the idea of taking over a real NFL team in its existence, not, drafting from scratch, and doing it with a full 53-man roster plus practice squad, offensive linemen scoring. We even have punter scoring. It's a very small amount of punter scoring, but it's there. And so that's the difference, is that this kind of marries your fan interest and the love of the team that you follow with the fantasy experience, so that you can be the GM of that team.
So, Evan, you mentioned you go to Ultra GM. The cost is $30, and we're doing a promo right now. If you type in Hunter, you get $5 off. you're going to get one team, but you're going to play in two leagues, right? A 32-team league and a 14-team league.
Yeah,
How exciting is that?
Yeah, let me expand on that. So the 32-team league, as you can probably guess, is basically the NFL. You're going to have your team. If you're the Panthers, for example, you're in a division with the same teams that the Panthers are in a division against. You're going to play the same schedule as the Panthers. So when the Panthers are playing the Falcons, you're going to be matched up against your counterpart who's a Falcons guy trying to build his perfect Falcons team. That's the league where all of your transactions take place. So that's where you make your trades. That's where the college draft happens. That's where all of the NFL teams are represented. The second league is a 14-team league that, in your case, in this case of this example, is an all Panthers league. So one of the teams in that league is a CPU managed team. That's the actual Panthers that play each week. And that's where you can measure the success of your team compared to the success of the real lineup and the success of the real Panthers GM. And then there's going to be 12 other guys like you, all starting with that same basic roster, and you're competing with them to see who can build it best. And as part of that, and as part of the strategy, because we do have the real salary cap, value propositions, those value propositions that real GMs have to take into account. It's not always just about who's the absolute best player, but which players represent value. Who are you going to get good production from at a low cap hit number? Who are the guys that, you might get great production from, but they cost so much that you're actually kind of overpaying for the production that they're giving you. And so all of those considerations are things you're going to take into account.
Two-part question for you in the same realm spectrum that you're talking about. You're talking about the realism of this league, and I'm curious about the level of realism you're aiming for. You're talking about salary cap. Are all the teams, are they strapped to like contract structure, CBA rules, draft picks? Like how does that all work?
So for the contract stuff, each player is connected with their actual NFL contract. So you can't separate the two. It's a package deal, the player and the contract. So for example, when you go into free agency and a player signs a new real deal in NFL free agency, he becomes available for bidding in Ultra GM, but you're bidding on the player and the contract. So for example, one might have thought going into the offseason, hey, Dan Moore is a nice player. That's a guy I think maybe is a little underrated. I'd like to get him on my team. But then you sort of see what he actually signs in free agency. And for a lot of people, it's like, wait a minute, I like Dan Moore perfectly fine, but, I don't want to pay that. So you're going to have to take those types of considerations into account. And then there's going to be other guys that you're like, wow, that's a good player who, for whatever reason ended up having to sign a 1 year, $2.5 million deal. And you're like, that guy's going to be a legit number 3 receiver. I think he's going to be productive. That's a value proposition where I'm going to get great production. I'm going to get great scoring out of this guy for a very small cap hit cost.
For our audience that's on YouTube, they can see the screen. I'm talking with Evan Goldberg, the creator of Ultra GM. But those that are on Spotify, welcome in. Those that are on iHeartRadio, welcome in. Those that are on Apple Podcast, welcome in. We're talking about this unique program. And now I will tell you, Evan, I played salary cap before. I've never played the way you're doing the draft picks. I think that's kind of neat. I guess the rationale there is if I could outsmart and outfox, a real GM, and he gets a bad pick and I'm building my team, hey, I get a value there. But you know what I've never done? And this was a question I was very curious about. Offensive linemen. I've never played fantasy football with offensive linemen. How do you deduce that scoring?
So our offensive lineman scoring, we're using a metric from Sports Info Solutions, SIS, that is their total points metric. And what it is essentially is they take the EPA gained or derived from each play. They then break down the film and they allocate credit and blame for those EPA points on that particular play. And that includes all players who are on the field, including offensive line. So we're using that for both run blocking and pass blocking. We're using their blocking points metric. And what it has is it has, a combination of both the value of the play in the sense of was it a good play, but it also has a component of impact that, if a player has a good play, but it doesn't result in a good play result, then it's less impact. If a player, an offensive lineman has the key block that springs a running back for an 80-yard touchdown, the lion's share of the credit on that play may well go to that offensive lineman rather than to the running back. So in our scoring system, the scoring is scaled to the relative value of the positions as indicated by the NFL through compensation and the use of draft resources. So quarterback is the most important position in Ultra GM. It's the one that scores the most by a healthy margin. Just like in the NFL, it's the most important position. But it's followed by then those premium positions that some of which have traditionally not even been a part of fantasy football, like left tackles.
Right.
Obviously in the IDP world, edge rushers are one of the valuable positions. Your number one cornerback is one of those valuable positions. So, those positions are more premium. Running backs, which are usually kind of your big dog in your traditional fantasy football, are actually lesser valued in Ultra GM, just like running backs tend to be somewhat devalued in the real NFL.
Evan, you have me kind of curious here, and just through your own words, your perspective, can you walk us through a typical offseason as a general manager in your league, from free agency to the college draft? What are you looking at? What should we be looking at? What are some helpful tips and pointers?
Sure. So the first event that will happen, and it happens once the league fills and locks, is that free agency will start. And to be an Ultra GM free agent, a player it's not when the player's old contract expires. It's when his old contract has expired and he has now signed a new contract. So like my Dan Moore example from earlier, Dan Moore would become a free agent, and this has already happened, when he signs his new deal. That new deal then becomes available for bidding, and he's a package deal with that contract. And you'll have, sort of a pool of fake money, so to speak, with which to bid on players. And you can start building your team once that league locks. The next event that then happens, and for the first set of leagues that are going to lock on July 15th, will be a draft that's going to start on July 28th. And that's essentially a redo of the college draft. So you'll start off in the same draft position where your team picked in the real draft. So if that team picked number 10, you're going to start off picking 10 and whatever other picks they had in the draft. Now, and then you have a chance to make the picks that you think they should have made, as opposed to the picks that they actually did make. So you get to sort of redo that draft in your own image. Now, I say you start out there because you can trade draft picks. You can trade players. You can trade players and draft picks together.
Oh,
so
wow.
You can do that to move up and down the draft board. If there's a player that you love that you think is going to go earlier, you can move up to try to grab him. And if there's a player, if you think that, hey, the position we're interested in is very deep here, I think I can get my guy later in the draft, maybe you want to trade back and accumulate picks. So all of those same considerations that a real GM would have going into the draft, you'll have as an Ultra GM.
I'm looking through your roster now, and I can't decide what team I want to go shopping for here. Do I want a beater team, or do I want a team that I'm a homer for, that I favor, or do I want a loaded roster? I just can't tell.
I just want to address the two leagues first, because there's that 32-team league, and then there's that Carolina league, or that in this case, that was the example we used, the team-specific league. And so no matter what team you choose, even if it's a team that may not be super competitive in the 32-team league, you have the ability to win that team-specific 14-team league. So you're never going to be out of it. It's never going to be like your season's over because the team started poorly. You'll have a chance to win that league, which in a lot of ways is probably the more meaningful win, because that's the one where you're starting off with equal opportunity. I think for a lot of people, I kind of view it as, in some ways, it's the teams that have the most work to be done that are the most intriguing to take over. Because those are kind of exciting rebuilds. I don't want to discourage anyone from taking the Eagles or anything, or the Chiefs or anything like that. You will have a great chance of winning your 32-team league with those teams. But you're probably not going to want to, upset the apple cart too much with those teams. You're probably going to want to kind of keep it steady and going as it's been. Whereas if you take a struggling team, you take the Raiders or Carolina perhaps, or the Saints, those are going to be teams that it's like, hey, I've got a blank canvas here, and there may not be that much that I may be willing to blow this thing up entirely and start over from scratch. So it really just depends upon what your mindset is and what kind of challenge you're interested in taking on.
I was talking to Jorge Edwards and JT Brew last night about this on Fantasy Frames. And we're the kind of guys, and I'm sure there's people out there like this, I will get like a Madden game and I'll just sit there all night building rosters, and I probably won't even play the game. I'll just sit there building rosters. So they fell in love with this program. Yeah. I'm sure this platform is going to fit all of us out there. I was wondering, though, do you think there's any sort of competitive edge, like looking at real life NFL trends, like say like coordinators changing teams or like, cap strategy in general, like with real life teams, when you're looking at Ultra GM, do you think the NFL trends reflect in your leagues?
I think they do. Among other things, you are going to want to be sort of keeping up with some of those changes you mentioned, like coordinator changes. So you got to remember, let's say, just keeping our Carolina example, you've got the Panthers, but let's say that you've traded for James Cook, just as a random example. Now, James Cook's not on the real Panthers. He's on the Bills. But, if the Bills change their offensive coordinator in the offseason and there's an indication that they're just not going to be running as much, well, that's going to affect the likely productivity and point scoring that you're going to get from James Cook. So you do want to be keeping in mind the situation that players around the league that you're putting on your team, you want to think about their situation. And that goes for the draft as well. So you'll have the luxury, in a sense, of doing the draft after the real draft has happened. You'll know which real teams the players have ended up with. And there may be some of those players that you realize, like, this person has found themselves in a great situation. They're in a team that's going to, it's a receiver on a team that doesn't have a great number two. The team's going to throw a lot. There's a great opportunity to generate points from that guy on that particular team. And so, that might push that player up in your mind as a draft target. And there may be other players who you really love the player, but they kind of end up falling into a situation where it's like, gee, like they're the third running back on this team. How many carries is this guy even going to get? I mean, I love the guy, and if they gave him the carries, I think he'd do great. But, is he going to get more than 50, 60 carries on the year because, he's the number 3 guy on a team that may not run that much? So those are things that you'll want to be keeping in mind here, just as you would in any other fantasy football where, the situation that the player's in, the scheme that they're in, all play into the value of the player.
I'm curious about the man behind the machine, Evan. I'm curious how long it actually took you to come up with the idea. Were you workshopping this for a while?
So, I mean, it came into my head a few years ago. It then took a pretty good amount of planning to put it together.
I'll bet.
And there were a lot of pieces that, had to really be thought through pretty extensively to make this work. So I'm pretty proud and excited about where we've ended up. with, I think, all of those pieces and questions kind of being answered in a nice, tidy package. So I'm very excited about that. But it did definitely take a lot of thinking and a lot of work to make this, bring this to fruition.
The other question I had for you in that regard, what has been your biggest surprise or your pain, good thing or bad thing? What's been your biggest surprise or pain since you launched Ultra GM?
It's just the struggle, which, I'm trying to overcome here is getting the word out. I think it's something that almost everyone who I've spoken to, who's like a real NFL fan, finds it interesting, thinks it's exciting and intriguing. But I've got to be able to kind of reach those people and
right.
reach the right people and get them willing to try it. They say that, only about 10%, 10 or 12%, something like that, I think, are the kind of early adopter crowd. And here we are in our first season. We just launched in April. And so, there's a lot of people that will kind of sit back and say, hey, I'll wait till next year. I'll let other people play this year and see how it goes for them. And so, that's been, I guess, probably the pain point or the struggle. It's like, come on, let's just get on there and play. It's a game. It's going to be fun. At $25, no, it's not free, but it's less than the cost of a team t-shirt. It's probably the cost of 2 beers at the stadium. I mean, it's just,
exactly.
It's really not that much for the amount of, I think, fun and engagement that you'll get out of it.
I mean, you were just talking about the promo code. If you type in Hunter, you get $5 off. So that's $25. I've played in bigger leagues than that, Evan. You're giving me a 32 team, and I'm going to play in a 14 team league. So that's good value in itself. The offensive lineman part, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little nervous, but I'm geeked up about it. I've never thought in a million years to play with offensive linemen, even punt returners. I'm learning something new every day here. What gave you the idea to play with offensive linemen and implement a real 32 team league?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things. I mean, one is just that, they're important. Like, in real football, like, offensive line is important. And it's something that, has traditionally been kind of ignored. And the reasons are obvious because it is difficult to score them. But they're an important part of football. And I think in order also to make it work in terms of a real draft, in terms of a replication of the draft, when you think about it and you think about, even if you just look at the first round of the draft, there are years when, fairly close to half of the first round might be offensive linemen. Or you might have, 7 or 8 offensive tackles can go in the first round, and maybe a guard or two, and maybe a center or two. So, it is important that there are positions that the NFL deems important. And in order to have a draft that's really going to track it in a way that you can really compare how you're doing to a real GM, I think it needed to be included. And to me, that's one of the most exciting parts of it. So
I was talking to Mace offline, and I know you guys already talked. And one of the first things we both came up with were like, oh boy, Madden. This is just like Madden. Is there any AI movement with this, like the machine learning to play? Is there like trade analyzation, or is there auto trading, or is it just owner against owner? Like how is it set up?
So there's no AI that's sort of built in. There are some interesting things that one can do with AI in terms of thinking about how you manage your team. And really, because this so replicates what's happening in the real NFL, you can essentially just guide yourself by what would be good decisions in the real world. Who are the good players to pursue in the real world? And the good players to pursue in the real world will be ones that will score well in Ultra GM. So, I do think there's plenty of use off the platform for AI to help you run your team and to think about things like the salary cap. But within the system for trades in particular, you have to have a human being to trade with. So,
right.
We all want trades to happen. In my experience, whether through, mock draft simulators or otherwise, I just have never seen one where I felt like the trade mechanisms were realistic. Same. It was always like you could kind of do whatever you wanted. this is going to be tougher because the people who are playing this, I think, are going to be pretty sophisticated fans. They're not going to give up the farm for nothing. I think we're all going to find out, like, as much as we may yell at the GM for not making certain trades, why didn't you move up and down in the draft? I think we may all find out, like, yeah, it's tougher than you think when you have to get a real person on the other side to give up what you want him to give up in exchange for what you're willing to give him.
Exactly. So, everyone has a plan beforehand, and is it going to work? Hey, you mentioned the people, the site. What are some features that people love that you didn't expect?
So, I think one of the features that I'm actually excited about, which was, arguably an over-engineering of the site, beyond kind of a minimum viable product, was the practice squad. That was something that probably didn't need to be included. But I actually think it's both an important part of roster building, especially on the bottom part of your roster, as players get injured and the like during the season. That's your best source of guys to plug into their place. Wow. But I also like the component of the practice squad where you can essentially steal players from other people's roster. So in Ultra GM, kind of like in the real world, if a guy is on your practice squad, he can be poached by another team, and you can poach players off other teams' practice squads. So if you want to protect a player, you've got to have them on your regular roster and not on the practice squad. Because on the practice squad, if there's a guy on another team's practice squad that you think, hey, my third receiver just went down, I need some receiver depth, and there's a guy on another team's practice squad that you think, might be next man up or whatever, you can snatch that guy away from him. And I think that's kind of a fun component to it that I don't think exists, to my knowledge, in any other kind of fantasy football platform.
No, not at all. Not that I know of. And like I said, I play in several deep leagues, 32 team leagues, 64 teams. I know for a fact there's people out there that are just going to love you, love your site. And I appreciate the time you spent with me, bringing all this to the table. And I'm looking forward to coming on and playing and competing. And me and JT were talking last night. We play in all these leagues, but they can't be the same type of leagues. And this is the most unique league that I've heard of by far.
Yeah, it really is very, very different from the other. But, like I said, there is a lot going on. It is, there's a level of complexity here, but it's also made somewhat simpler because if you just guide yourself by the principle, like, who are the players you'd want on your real team if you were a real GM, without worrying too much about strategy and scoring and the like, you'll be guided pretty well. If you get those players and you do a good job of drafting the college, players in the college draft and the like, you're going to end up having a good team. And over the course of seasons, I think you'll see the benefits of that.
Evan, I don't have anything else. It was so good having you on the show. We'll do more of these throughout the season. I'm going to need your help to kind of, Obi-Wan Kenobi through this thing. So great talking to you. Any closing thoughts, and where can the audience find you?
So, the website is www.ultragm.com. And my email, if people wanted to reach out or had any additional questions, is Evan, EVAN, @ultragm.com. And, happy to help you along with anything that comes up, any questions you may have, and the like. It is new. It is different. I know that there's, lots of questions folks may have. The site does have a very extensive FAQ section. So you can go there, on the bottom of the website page, and it will answer a lot of your questions, but I'm happy to answer them as well.
Heck yeah. And I'm looking forward to playing in your leagues. Really excited. And this is why we do this podcast. All we are is an extension of one another. We learn new things every day, and never knew I could play with offensive linemen before. So thank you, Evan.
Sure thing.
This is the IDP podcast, and take care and talk hard, everyone.
Have a good one.